In a powerful and unexpected on-air moment, Hollywood legend Jane Fonda was moved to tears during a live interview with Burkina Faso's young outspoken president, Ibrahim Traoré. What began as a formal discussion quickly turned into something deeply emotional when Traoré shared a message that struck a chord with Fonda, leaving the studio and viewers around the world stunned. This video captures the exact moment her voice cracked, her eyes filled with tears, and the emotional exchange that followed. The studio lights brightened as Jane Fonda, radiant yet composed, sat across from Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim. True, the audience expected a formal interview about politics, climate, and Africa's future. But within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady yet filled with warmth. "Madame Fonda, I grew up watching your films, but more than your acting, it was your courage, your fight for justice that reached even the small villages of my country." Jane blinked, taken aback. Her practiced composure faltered. She hadn't expected personal words, certainly not from a president half her age. "I was a boy," Traoré continued softly, "and I saw a woman who used her voice not for herself but for others. That day I told my mother, if she can speak for millions, maybe one day I can speak for my people." The studio fell into an uneasy silence. Jane shifted in her seat, her throat tightening. The camera zoomed in, catching the shimmer in her eyes. It was the kind of silence that warned viewers something unforgettable was about to happen. Jane swallowed hard, gripping her hands to steady. "Them? I didn't know," she whispered, her voice already cracking. Traoré gave a faint smile. "You didn't have to know. Sometimes the seeds we plant grow in places we never see." The audience leaned in, utterly spellbound. Even the co-hosts, usually quick with follow-up questions, sat frozen. Traoré's words were calm but piercing. "My mother would tell me, 'One day, son, you'll meet the people who shaped your courage. And when you do, thank them. Not for yourself, but for all of us.'" Jane pressed her lips together, blinking rapidly as tears welled. "You have no idea what this means to me," she managed. Traoré nodded gently. "And you have no idea what you've meant to us." The camera caught a single tear slipping down Jane's cheek. The audience gasped softly. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a moment of truth, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing history. By now, the studio's stillness was thick with emotion. The audience sat on the edge of their seats as Jane Fonda wiped her eyes, unable to hold back any longer. "Ibrahim," she said, her voice trembling. "I've spoken on many stages to many crowds, but no one has ever said something like this to me. Not like this." Traoré leaned closer because no one else needed to, but my people did, and through me, they finally can. Jane covered her mouth, sobbing softly. The co-host beside her reached for her hand, while the cameras captured every second. Traoré's tone grew even softer. "You taught me that strength is not in anger, but in love. And I want the world to see that the fight for dignity, your fight, lives on in Africa." At that moment, the audience could no longer hold back. Some cried openly, others clasped hands in silent reverence. And Jane, the woman known for her poise and fire, whispered through her tears, "I've never been so honored in my life." The studio was forever changed, and the world was just beginning to watch. The studio felt unreal, as if time had slowed. The crew behind the cameras exchanged stunned looks. Even the sound technician wiped his eyes discreetly. Jane leaned forward, her hand trembling as she reached for a glass of water. "Ibrahim," she said softly, "you speak with such weight. It's like you're carrying millions of voices." Traoré nodded. "Because I am not just here as I am here, as the son of a farmer. As the dream of a mother who believed a child could grow into a bridge between worlds." The audience gasped gently, sensing the depth of his words. Jane pressed her lips together, trying not to cry again. "You remind me of why I started speaking. Out all those years ago, I wanted the world to care. Traoré's voice softened further, and you succeeded. Even in my village, far from your world, we cared because you dared." At that moment, you could hear a pin drop in the studio. The world watching, through screens, held their breath, realizing this was no ordinary interview. Traoré reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Jane's eyes widened. "This," he said gently, "is a letter from the women of my country. They asked me to give it to you if I ever met you. I think today is the day." Jane's trembling fingers accepted the letter. As she unfolded it, her vision blurred with tears. The words were simple, yet overwhelming. "Dear Jane, you may never know our names, but your courage reached us. You gave us hope. Today we give you our gratitude." Jane covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Traoré placed a steady hand on the table. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that thousands of women across an ocean are thanking you right now." The studio audience began to cry softly. Some clasped hands, others wiped tears from their cheeks. For Jane, the letter wasn't just paper. It was the weight of love, hope, and history delivered straight to her trembling hands. Jane finally found, her voice, though it cracked with every word, "All my life I wondered if it mattered. The protests, the speeches, the sacrifices, but this." She held up the letter with shaking hands. "This tells me it wasn't in vain." Traoré leaned closer, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Madame Fonda, sometimes the ripples we make turn into waves we never see. You started one. My generation is riding it." The crowd erupted in applause, though many clapped through tears. Jane wiped her cheeks, her breathing unsteady. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost. Faith." Traoré gave a warm smile. "And you've given me something I needed. Proof that courage can travel across time and oceans." The co-hosts looked at one another, clearly overwhelmed, some wiping tears themselves. Jane reached across the table and touched Traoré's hand. "Ibrahim, thank you for reminding me why I ever spoke out." And in that moment, the audience wasn't watching an actress and a president. They were witnessing two souls, one seasoned, one rising, finding each other across generations. Jane sat frozen, clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. The camera zoomed in on her trembling hands, her tears now flowing freely. Traoré's voice was steady, but there was a softness that pierced through the silence. "My people wanted me to tell you this, not as a leader, but as a son, because they knew only a son could carry such a message with truth." Jane shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you or them," she whispered. "You already did," Trot replied gently. "Years ago, when you spoke for those no one else would, you thanked us without even knowing." The studio erupted into quiet sobs. One audience member pressed a tissue to her face. Another mouthed, "Wow." For Jane, the dam inside her heart, the one that had held decades of doubt and loneliness, had broken, and in its place, there was something powerful. The realization that her legacy was alive in the hearts of people she had never met. Traoré took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something even heavier. "May I share a story?" he asked softly. Jane nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. He leaned forward. "When I was 12, there was a drought in my village. My mother carried water for miles. She would tell me, 'Ibrahim, the world may not see our suffering, but one day you will make them see.'" The studio held its breath. "My mother is gone now," Traoré continued, his voice tightening. "But she made me promise that if I ever met the people who inspired me to fight for justice, I would tell them they were part of her strength." Jane gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. "So today," Traoré said, locking eyes with her, "I'm keeping my promise. Through you, my mother's hope lives on." The entire studio was silent, except for the quiet sound of Jane Fonda's sobs. Jane reached across the table and clasped Traoré's hand, her tears falling onto the letter she still held. "Young man," she said shakily, "you've given me back something I thought I'd lost. The belief that love and truth can change the world." Traoré squeezed her hand gently. "And you've given me something I needed. The reminder that I'm not walking this road alone, that someone before me carried the torch, and I am only continuing the journey." The co-hosts were visibly shaken, some dabbing at their eyes. The audience sat in stunned silence, as though afraid to break the sacredness of the moment. Jane looked at Trop with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Your mother must have been extraordinary," she whispered. Trop's voice trembled for the first time. And today, she would have been proud to see her son sitting with the woman who helped him believe. The crowd broke into soft applause. Though many clapped through tears, it was no longer just an interview. It had become a bridge between generations, between continents, between two souls united by truth. The studio was so still, you could hear the soft hum of the cameras. Jane, her hand still clasped with Tro's, looked into his eyes as though searching for something deeper. "Ibram," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your words, they've shaken something inside me. I thought I was done making a difference, that my time had passed." Traoré leaned closer. "No, Jane, your time didn't pass. It planted seeds, and now I see them growing in places you never imagined." The crowd stirred, many nodding with tearful smiles. Jane pressed her lips together, fighting back another wave of tears. She was remembering nights alone, wondering if her efforts had ever truly mattered. And now here was a young president from a distant land telling her that her voice had crossed oceans, that her legacy was alive. The weight of that realization brought her two quiet sobs, her shoulders trembling. Traoré waited, allowing the silence to speak. Sometimes silence is the loudest sound in the room. As Jane regained her breath, Traoré's tone grew even softer. "My mother used to say," he began, "the people who fight for justice are like trees. Even if they never see the fruit, their shade gives others a chance to live." Jane covered her mouth. Her tears falling again, Traoré's eyes glistened. "You were one of those trees, Jane. In my village, when the drought came, people whispered your name. They remembered your courage when you stood up for those who had no voice. My mother believed that if people like you existed, then the world could change." Jane let out a trembling breath. "Your mother sounds like a woman I would have been honored to meet." "She would have said the same about you," Traoré replied. The camera panned across the studio audience. Not a single dry eye in the crew members. Behind the cameras were discreetly wiping their faces. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a message echoing from a mother in Africa to a woman in Hollywood, carried across generations and now felt by millions. Jane looked at Traoré through tear-filled eyes. "I've spent years wondering if my sacrifices mattered, if the ridicule I endured was worth it." Traoré's grip tightened gently on her hand. "Jane, your sacrifices lit torches in hearts you'll never meet. I'm one of them. And today I stand not as a politician, but as a son telling you that you gave us hope when we had none." Her breath hitched, and the studio went silent again. At that moment, a young woman from the audience suddenly cried out, "You changed my life too, Jane." Her voice cracked, and others quickly murmured in agreement. Jane gasped, overwhelmed. She shook her head, whispering, "I don't deserve this." Traoré's response was firm but kind. "You do, because true heroes never see the full reach of their impact. But the world does." Jane closed her eyes, pressing her hand to her heart. The tears kept flowing, but this time they carried something more than pain. They carried healing. The interview had transformed. It was no longer just history being discussed. It was history being made. The studio no longer felt like a studio. It felt like a sacred space, as though the walls had melted away and the entire world was listening. Jane held a trembling tissue, her hand shaking as she dabbed her cheeks. She turned to the audience. I thought I was finished, that my fire had gone out." Traoré's steady voice filled the air. "A fire that burns for justice never dies. Jane, it only waits for a wind to rise." The words sank deep into every heart in the room. People shifted uncomfortably, fighting back their emotions. Even those who had come expecting just another talk show segment now realized they were witnessing history. Jane whispered, Maybe this is the wind I've been waiting for." Traoré leaned forward, his eyes unblinking. "Not just the wind. Jane, the world is ready to listen again." It felt like destiny had paused time itself. Jane locked eyes with Traoré, and in that gaze, the years between them disappeared. She wasn't a Hollywood icon anymore. She wasn't an activist haunted by doubts. She was a woman being told, truly told, that her life still mattered. Her lips trembled. "Do you really believe change is still possible?" Traoré's response was immediate. "Jane, I am proof of it. A boy from a small village in Burkina Faso now sits here with you, not because the world was kind, but because people like you refused to be silent." Her chest rose sharply as a sob escaped. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail. The wet shimmer in her eyes, the way she clutched Traoré's hand as though afraid to let go. A hush swept through the studio audience, broken only by the muffled sniffles of people crying. For that moment, words became unnecessary. Their eyes spoke everything: hope, gratitude, and a bond that went beyond borders. Then it happened. A single person in the audience stood clapping softly. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire studio was on its feet, giving a standing ovation, not to a scripted performance, but to the raw honesty unfolding. Before them, Jane looked around, stunned. She covered her mouth, her tears flowing freely. "Now, I don't know what to say." Traoré smiled gently. "Say nothing. Let your heart speak." The applause grew thunderous. Some audience members embraced. Others raised their hands skyward, as though they were part of something divine. The co-hosts wiped their faces, too moved to speak. The production crew had tears rolling down their cheeks, while still holding their cameras steady. Jane, overwhelmed, whispered, This is the most powerful moment of my life." Traoré's reply was quiet, but it pierced through the noise. "It's only the beginning." And with that, the world held its breath for what would come next. The studio lights seemed to dim, though they hadn't. All eyes were fixed on President Ibrahim. Emotion. He said, "Jane, you once stood against a war when the world wanted you silent. That courage, it saved lives, even if history tried to punish you for it. Today, I want you to know Africa has not forgotten." Jane's hands flew to her face as the tears spilled freely. The audience gasped, some covering their mouths. Even the co-hosts were left speechless. Traoré continued, "Our children read about you. They learn that truth is worth more than comfort, that a woman's voice, even when shaken, can be stronger than an army." The words echoed across the studio like a prayer. The silence that followed was not empty, it was holy. Jane whispered through her tears, I never knew." And at that moment, the world outside seemed to pause. Without hesitation, Jane stood and walked toward Traoré. She extended her arms, and he rose to meet her. The hug that followed wasn't just between two people. It felt like a bridge between continents, generations, and struggles. The audience erupted in sobs. People clapped through their tears. Some even shouted, "We love you, Jane, and thank you, Traoré." One camera panned across the crowd, capturing a sea of damp faces and trembling hands pressed to hearts. Jane clung to him and whispered into his ear, audible only because of the mic nearby, "You've given me back my faith." Traoré's reply was soft, yet powerful, "And you've reminded the world that compassion is timeless." When they finally parted, the studio wasn't the same. It was as if history had been rewritten right there in real time. For the first time in years, Jane smiled through her tears. "I thought my best days were behind me," she said, voicing, "but this is the beginning of something greater." The final minutes of the interview felt larger than television. Jane sat back down, still trembling, while the audience refused to stop clapping. Traoré raised his hand gently, signaling for quiet. "Let us not leave this moment here. Let us carry it with us into our homes, our streets, our hearts. Change begins with truth, and truth begins when we listen." Jane, voice cracking, added, "Ibrahim, you've reminded me why I still fight, why we all must keep fighting, not with anger, but with love and courage." Tears ran down faces across the studio. The ovation that followed was deafening. People stood, hands joined, many unable to stop crying. As the camera zoomed in for the final shot, Jane looked straight into the lens, eyes glistening, and whispered, "This moment will live with me forever." And so the broadcast ended, but not the impact. Around the world, hearts were touched, lives were changed, and hope was reborn. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, don't let the tears end here. Tap like to show your love. Subscribe so you don't miss more unforgettable moments like this. And please comment below. Tell us how this story moved you. Your words matter more than you know. Let's keep the fire of truth and compassion burning.